K. So you want to own a plasma center. You've seen one. Beige building, strip mall, friendly sign. A promise painted on the window. Earn up to $1,200 your first month. Free Wi-Fi. Recliners. It looks like a cross between a dentist's office and a phone store, and that is deliberate. And the business sounds beautiful. Your raw material walks in the door on its own two legs. It regenerates. Your supplier restocks himself in 48 hours and comes back twice a week. There is no factory on Earth that can make what he's carrying. No synthetic substitute exists for most of it. And demand grows 6 to 8% a year, every year, forever. So you do the math on a napkin. You pay a donor $50. Pharmaceutical companies pay somewhere between $300 and $800 for a liter of plasma. That gap looks like the easiest money in North America. Here's the first problem with the napkin. You will not keep that gap. Almost none of it. Collection centers, the buildings, the recliners, the friendly sign, run on estimated margins of 10 to 20%. The $300 to $800 was never yours. It's just passing through your lobby on the way to somebody else. 200,000 Americans sat in one of those recliners today. 1,247 centers. $4.7 billion paid out to donors in a single year. And the people who own the buildings are not the people getting rich. So who is? By the end of this video, you're going to understand 4 things. The 4 kinds of plasma center, and which one you could actually own. Why the money isn't in the building, and where it actually sits. Why these centers get placed where they get placed, which is a peer-reviewed finding, and not an opinion. And why the United States has quietly become the plasma supply for most of the planet, including the countries that made this illegal. Let's start with the 4 kinds. Because they all look identical from the parking lot, and they are completely different businesses. Type 1. The Captive Collection Arm. CSL Plasma. BioLife, owned by Takeda since 2019. Grifols. These aren't standalone businesses at all. They're the front end of a pharmaceutical manufacturer. The center doesn't sell plasma to anyone. It feeds a factory the same company owns. Together, those 3 collect over 75% of all plasma in the United States. You cannot own one of these. Type 2. The Independent Collector. This is the one you could actually own. Companies like Immunotech build and operate centers and supply the big manufacturers under contract. They've built more than 70 since 2013. You're a contractor. You take the real estate risk, the staffing risk, the licensing risk, and then you hand the plasma to somebody who was never going to let you keep the rest. Type 3. The Specialty Center. Donors with rare antibodies. Small pool, much higher pay per donor, much harder to run. Type 4. The one that doesn't pay at all. Canadian Blood Services. HEMA Quebec. Public collectors that refuse to compensate donors on principle. Hold on to Type 4. It becomes the entire story in about 8 minutes. If you're picturing yourself owning a plasma center, you're picturing Type 2. So let's find out what Type 2 costs. And the wall isn't the building. It's the permission. Every center collecting source plasma in the United States has to be licensed by the FDA. That is not a form. That's construction, medical staff, a physician on record, screening infrastructure, cold chain, testing, inspection, and a waiting period. Immunotech's own announcements describe centers that are built and then in the process of attaining licensure, which is a polite way of saying you will pay for a fully staffed facility for a while before it is allowed to operate. Then you have to buy your supply. New donor bonuses run $700 to $1,200 for the first month. CSLs run $700 to $1,100 across the first 8 donations. That isn't generosity. That's customer acquisition cost, front-loaded, because a repeat donor is the entire business. Repeat donors are over 80% of the pool. And then you need scale. Because of a number the industry publishes about itself and almost nobody outside it has ever heard. Treating one patient for 1 year takes between 130 and 1,200 plasma donations. Read that again. 1 patient, 1 year, up to 1,200 visits. That is why there are 1,200 centers in America. That's why there are 54% more of them than there were 4 years ago. And it is why the arithmetic of this entire industry only works if a very large number of people need $50 on a Tuesday. Reveal 1. The building is the cheapest part of the machine. You collect plasma. You don't make medicine. The step that makes medicine is called fractionation, separating plasma into immunoglobulin, albumin, clotting factors, and it takes 7 to 12 months, and a facility that costs a fortune. That is where the margin lives, and that is where the ownership is welded shut. The top 5 fractionators held 80% of the global market in 2024. 5 companies, 80%. You are not becoming the 6th. Grifols put €160 million into a single Barcelona facility in 2025 just to double its own capacity. That's the cost of entry to the step above you. Your recliner in the strip mall is an intake valve on a machine you will never own. Reveal 2. Now watch where they put the intake valves. This is the part people assume is a conspiracy theory, so I'm going to cite it carefully. A 2018 Case Western study found that states with more plasma donation centers also had higher populations of low-income and minimum-wage workers, and more centers in states offering less cash assistance to poor people. One of the researchers used the phrase surgically placing. An earlier study in the American Journal of Public Health found commercial plasma clinics were 5 to 8 times more likely to sit in census tracts classified as high risk than chance would predict. University of Michigan researchers found the same shape. Centers cluster in or near impoverished neighborhoods. And then there is the border. In the Rio Grande Valley, centers sit within walking distance of a country where selling your plasma is illegal. CSL says it selects sites based on population density, real estate availability, and zoning laws. Fine. Notice that in America, those 3 things together are a fairly reliable map of where poor people live. Here's the 2026 update, and it's the tell. The New York Times found plasma centers now opening in the suburbs. The industry calls that expansion. The other reading is that the original neighborhoods are saturated, and that the definition of someone who needs $50 this week has widened. Reveal 3. So the arm gets $50. What does the medicine cost? Immunoglobulin runs from $100 to over $350 per gram. The published U.S. cost of treating an average patient with CDP, a chronic nerve disorder, exceeds $136,000 a year. Same molecule, $50 at the top of the pipe, 6 figures at the bottom. And I want to be precise here because the lazy version of this video stops at that sentence. That gap is not all profit. Testing, cold chain, 7 to 12 months of processing, regulatory compliance, and pooling plasma from thousands of donors are real, expensive, necessary costs. And the patient at the end of the pipe is not a villain. That is somebody who dies without this. But somebody sets that price. And it isn't the donor, it isn't the patient, and it definitely isn't you. Here's how this breaks, and it breaks in 2 directions at once. For the donor, the legal ceiling in the United States is 2 donations a week, 104 a year, with a 48-hour minimum recovery. That's the safety rail, and it's real. But look at what the industry optimizes. The RICA donation system cut collection time from 75 minutes to 35. Haemonetics' ENOMI algorithm lifts the plasma volume taken per donation by 9 to 12%. Faster chairs, fuller bags. Every one of those efficiency gains is extracted from the same arms, and the compensation is not indexed to any of it. You're paid per visit. And the centers are careful to call it compensation for your time and inconvenience, not payment for your plasma, because that distinction is legal, not moral. For the owner, your entire business model depends on economic desperation staying exactly where it is. Americans earned $4.7 billion from plasma last year, up more than 30% since 2022. And the reason reported for that increase is the rising cost of living. Your supply curve is a poverty index. If wages rise, your donor base walks out the door. There is no other business in North America where an economic recovery shows up on your risk register. So here's the machine, fully assembled. At the bottom, 200,000 people a day, paid $50 to $100, capped at 104 visits a year. in neighborhoods that multiple peer-reviewed studies say were not selected at random. One floor up, the center, 10 to 20% margin, carries the lease, the FDA license, the staff, and the acquisition cost of every donor. One floor up, 5 companies holding 80% of the global fractionation market. 7 to 12 months of processing turns a pool of thousands of arms into a product with a brand name. One floor up, $100 to $350 a gram, $136,000 a year per patient. Insurers, public health systems, governments. And at the very top, and this is the part that reframes everything, sits a national export ledger. The United States supplies roughly 70% of the world's plasma. It exported $6.2 billion of plasma-derived products in 2024. American plasma exports are worth more than American coal and gold exports combined. That's not a company. That's a national resource industry. And the resource is people. 2 futures. Open the ledger. Scenario 1. Paid donation is defended, and it works. And there is real evidence for this. Economists found that opening a plasma center in a city lowers local crime by around 12%, that a nearby center cuts young borrowers' demand for payday loans by 13%, that these centers reduce high-interest debt held by Americans by $180 to $227 million a year. That's not nothing. A legal $50 beats a payday loan every single time, and without paid donation, the global supply collapses. Scenario 2. A country bans it on ethical grounds, which brings us to Canada. Canadian Blood Services will not pay donors. On principle, it collects roughly 13 to 14% of the immune globulin Canadians actually need. Around 80% of Canada's immune globulin is bought from the United States, made from paid donors. Canada's target is about 25% domestic sufficiency. The minimum considered secure is 50. So Canada took the moral position and kept the product. Heads, the industry wins. Tails, the industry wins. It just ships the bag across a border and sells it to the country that outlawed making it. It's the same face on both sides of the coin. Here's the reframe. The economy used to buy your time. Then it learned to buy your attention. Now, twice a week, 48 hours apart, it buys the thing your body makes on its own. And look where everyone ends up. The donor carries it in his veins for $50. The patient carries it at $136,000 a year. The center owner carries the lease, the license, and 10 to 20%. And the money, the actual money, sits 7 to 12 months downstream, in a building none of them will ever walk into, inside an industry of 5 companies, inside an export line worth more than American gold. The owner collects. Everybody else donates. And once you see this shape, you'll start finding it everywhere. Because the business is never the building. The business is whoever owns the step you're not allowed to reach. Next time, we go one step further into the same engine, the egg and sperm banks, where the raw material isn't renewable, the pay gap is wider, and almost nobody is regulating it at all. Subscribe, because once you see this pattern, you cannot unsee it.